Okay, thank you for that lovely introduction. Hello, everybody. Is everybody having a good time? That's nice. That's good to hear. I'm having a great time. I think today's been pretty excellent. Great mix of talks we've had today. And this is going to be the last event of the day before beer, which is very important. So here's how it's going to work. We've got a kind of... this is all going to be pretty unstructured. Even how long this is going to go on is kind of unstructured. We're beginning now, and we're going on till at least 5, but it could be 5:30. Who knows? Could even be longer. But any time from 5, we might finish up. You know, if it's not, if they're really dull and boring, it won't be my fault, right? If they're really dull and boring, we'll finish up early. We'll all go for beers at 5. But it could continue on. I'm only kidding. They'll be wonderful. So we're going to have some. To the people who make browsers. We've been putting the call out for a few days now, PPK on Twitter and me and my blog, saying if you have any questions you'd like to put to mobile browser makers, let's hear them. So I've had some responses on my blog, most of them people commenting first, but after a few of those there were some genuine questions, so I'll get around to asking some of those. The good questions. Some people have been asking questions on Twitter. Thank you very much. I've been checking the Mobilism hashtag throughout the day, and there's been 1 or 2 questions in there, along with nice comments about all the talks, which was great to see. And the occasional comment, you know, complaining about whether the chairs are comfortable or whether the food is any good, right? It wouldn't be a conference in the Netherlands if it didn't have people moaning about something or another. Right? I mean, this is the language that gave us the word Miereneuker. It makes sense that Twitter is the perfect medium for this. If you haven't submitted a question by Twitter, too late. You had your chance. I'm not going to be looking at Twitter while I'm supposed to be talking to these guys. However, you will get a chance to ask a question. As this progresses, I'll open it up to the audience. So be thinking of questions. If in the middle of this you just can't take it and you have to scream out your question straight away, do it, man. Just do it. Like, stand up, wait for somebody to bring you a microphone, and then just scream out your question. Anyway, so this is the way it's going to work. We'll have some pre-prepared questions to begin with. Probably start with some of the more technical stuff that people want to know about, technical issues, and we'll broaden it into maybe a more philosophical debate about the mobile web and the future and browsers and the meaning of life. And then we'll involve you guys, but it could go anywhere. Who knows? Who knows where this will go? So let me introduce the people I have with me here today. To my left, I have Eli Fidler from Toronto in Canada. He works at RIM, which sounds rude, but isn't. It's Research in Motion, and you'll know them for the BlackBerry. Over there, we've got Andrea Trasatti, and I should be rolling the R's as I pronounce both his first and last name, but I'm incapable of rolling my R's. I apologize, Andrea.
We practiced
I'm sorry.
Yesterday.
I'm sorry. I just can't do it. Stage fright. Andrea's from Nokia, and then we've got Andreas Bovens, who is from Belgium, but now based up in Norway, because he works for Opera. So basically representatives from RIM, Nokia, and Opera. And that's it, as regards representatives. How strange, you might say. I could think of a few other mobile browser manufacturers that should be on a panel about mobile browsers. Indeed. And PPK has been doing his utmost to try and get representatives from other browser makers here. And no. I mean, Apple, forget about it, right? Apple never send anybody to any of these kind of, to speak at conferences. Steve Jobs is allowed to speak, Phil Schiller, that's pretty much it. No one else at Apple is ever allowed to speak in an event, so there's no chance of having representatives from Apple here, which is a shame. And PPK tried to get someone from Google to come along, and there isn't anyone specifically involved with dev outreach for Google WebKit, for Android Google WebKit. There is for Android in general, but not specifically for WebKit. And that's a shame. It has to be said, the timing is kind of awkward because Google I.O. is going on and all that. And PPK reached out to lots of other people too, but this is it. These are the people who were brave enough to step up to the plate. So, I salute them for their bravery. And I have to begin with the disclaimer. And this is, when you put the DVD in the DVD player, if everyone, remember DVDs? And you'd get the disclaimer to start saying that the views and opinions expressed are purely whatever, not the opinions of the the usual crap where they cover their ass about what they're about to say in the commentary. Imagine that's here, right? I'm putting that disclaimer up. The opinions expressed here are total bollocks, just shooting the breeze. They do not represent a company's opinion. So don't be trying to hold Nokia to a certain standpoint just because of something Andreas says, or don't think that Opera taking a certain position on something just because of something Andreas says, okay? These are just opinions. I'm also saying this as much for your benefit as for the panelists here, so that they know they're in a safe environment. Okay, feel free. You can relax here, all right? Nobody's watching, right? Ignore that camera up there. Nobody's watching. Okay, so that's the ground rules I've set. So what I wanted to do was I was going to begin with a targeted question for each of the panelists, specific to their browser. Then we'll get into the more specific technical questions for everyone. So let's see, who will I begin with? Andrea. And this was a question that PPK put together. He wants to know exactly which browsers does Nokia maintain and for which platforms. How long will they continue to exist? PPK tried to do a count. Let's see, you've got like Symbian WebKit, S40 WebKit, which is like Symbian, Micro B for MeeGo, Ovi for S40, and soon Internet Explorer Mobile. How many are there?
I stopped counting after 3, but right now in development we have 2. So there's WebKit for Symbian and Ovi Browser for Series 40. That's all we have in development.
So that's what you plan to maintain?
Yes. So the WebKit, for example, for Series 40 is not currently in development. So that's end of life. There used to be actually a WAP browser in Series 40. That is not going to be maintained any further. Of course, it is still coming, and devices that are being released now still might have
What
it.
does end of life mean for you? As in, like, you're not going to answer the phone calls when people have.
We never answer phone calls anyway, but no, it means that unless there is some major security issue, then that's whatever is in the browser, and that's the amount of capabilities that you get.
Okay.
On the other hand, for Symbian, for example, we keep maintaining the WebKit. We announced Symbian Anna that is coming in the next few months, and you can already see it on the C7 Astound, the one that is on sale in the US. That one is already pretty much the 7.3 browser that is coming to Symbian across the board, so on all Symbian 3 devices, and also non-touch devices and previous devices, and then the Ovi browser for the Series 40, which is a proxy browser.
And this whole Microsoft Nokia thing, you're just ignoring that, putting your fingers in here? Going,
well, you asked me, PPK said, which ones Nokia is maintaining.
I see. Okay.
So IE is a Windows Phone thing, and Microsoft maintains it. So far, the plan is when the Windows Phone comes, it will run whatever browser is on that Windows Phone.
Okay.
So
Nokia is still Nokia, Microsoft still Microsoft.
For the software platform, yes. So
okay.
yeah, it makes Nokia. Microsoft talked about their IE7, the IE9 coming in their next release, which is I think Mango. So.
But if people have questions on that, you're not the guy to talk to.
No.
Right.
Correct.
Okay. Good. Glad that's cleared up. Speaking of maintaining end-of-life products, Eli, what advice do you have for people trying to deal with the pre-WebKit BlackBerry browser?
It's a very good question, and we get it a lot from people. And I guess the first thing to start with is that BlackBerry 6 and onwards is WebKit. That was the first BlackBerry OS version that has WebKit. The Torch was the first device out. And in most respects, it is compatible with WebKit on all of the other mobile platforms. There's obvious subtle differences between what you get on iOS and what you get on Android and what you get on Nokia's phones. But WebKit is WebKit to some extent. Before that, we had the 5.0 browser. And the 5.0 browser is kind of a hybrid. It's not WebKit. It does have some basic HTML5 and CSS3 support, but certainly not to the level that people who have been writing desktop websites expect, and supporting it can be a challenge sometimes. But
You didn't mention JavaScript there, I noticed.
it actually has decent JavaScript support. Performance is not amazing. So I don't think that people are really going to be doing a lot of JavaScript-based animations and highly visual things on the 5.0 browser, but basic support for things does work better than a lot of people would expect. And we are maintaining support backwards to 5.0 for our WebWorks platform, which is our device APIs and widgets framework that I'm sure will come up in future questions. Before that, so 4.7, 4.6, and earlier, the browsers were frankly not that great, and I think that everyone kind of knows that. Outside of the company, there's a lot of expertise on people who are being forced to support these platforms, probably more than I know. I joined about the 6.0 time, so I don't have a lot of personal experience there, but there are some frameworks out there like jQuery Mobile that will be doing some of this work for you. So that's definitely something to look into. All that being said, the market share of 4.6 and 4.7 and earlier is dropping quickly, and the market share of 5.0 and 6.0 together has well surpassed 4.6 and earlier, and that gap will continue to widen. The biggest use right now for the earlier releases is corporate devices in North America, and that's still an important market to target, but most of the people who are doing that are very specifically focused on those platforms.
Okay, good answer. Although when you said WebKit is WebKit, I could pretty much see PPK kind of tense up.
Yeah.
Because I believe he has strong opinions on that viewpoint.
I hope everyone's read PPK's article on how WebKit is not WebKit.
It is well worth reading. So Andreas, for you,
Yes.
Opera in the mobile space has two products. And I can never keep straight in my head which is which. What's the difference and which is which between Opera Mobile and Opera Mini?
Okay. To explain this simply, inside the Opera browser there is a core rendering engine. We call it core internally. To the outside world we call it Presto. It sounds a bit fancier and faster even. And so what we try to do is in all the deliveries we do and all the products we make, we ship the same the same Presto rendering engine. This means that in Opera Mobile you get the full rendering engine, the same rendering engine you get on desktop, on the desktop browser, is also available on the phone. And so the Opera Mobile browser is currently at version number 11, and it's available on Android and on Series 60, for Series 60 phones. So we're not supporting Windows Mobile 6.5 anymore, and I'm not sure yet what will happen with Windows Phone 7. So that's a little bit up in the air still.
Okay.
So that is Windows Mobile. So you got the full browser, the full rendering engine on the phone. In case of Opera Mini, there the rendering engine lives on the server. That sounds a little bit strange, but what happens there? So it's a proxy browser, which means that whenever you load a page on Opera Mini, which is sort of a thin client on the phone, it quickly connects to your server. It says, "Hey, I want to load this web page." The server connects to the site, fetches the web page from the site, renders it on the server, and then sends back a strongly compressed version to the phone. That sounds pretty complicated, but it happens really fast, actually often faster than if you would render everything on the phone. So that's Opera Mini. And so we see that a lot of people that have feature phones are interested in this because their phones are not capable of running a full rendering engine. Basically, their devices are too slow, too outdated, or there are other issues. So for them, Opera Mini is perfect because it allows them to get a decent web experience without having a smartphone or the latest model of phone.
So just in terms of numbers, which gets more use?
Yeah, Opera Mini gets more use because there's much more feature phone users out there than smartphone users. So I believe we surpassed in March. We had 102 million monthly users on Opera Mini. and they viewed, if I'm correct, 60 billion pages within that month, which amounts to 8.8 petabytes of data that was compressed to our servers, and then, well, you keep about 80% or so of the data traffic. Right. So it's interesting for users also because, well, they have to pay less they have to pay less per megabyte, of course, because they get less data, and which is especially cool when you're roaming, because you'll have to pay less. And it speeds up things significantly.
But I mean, as we saw in the talks earlier today, what is a feature phone, what is a smartphone? That the lines are starting to blur. I would hope to see those numbers drop off of
Opera Mini?
Yeah, and more and more people using, say, Opera Mobile.
So there is. So we see people, increasingly also using Opera Mobile. I believe right now we are about 50 million people use Opera Mobile monthly. So it's increasing there as well. However, what you do see, and we were also surprised a little bit. So you would think, Opera Mini is only for a feature phone, and then once you have an advanced phone, you go to a full rendering engine. It's more powerful, and that's true. I personally prefer that as well. But still, in certain scenarios, for instance, when you have bad coverage, it was mentioned a couple of times today, then you actually see that Opera Mini is just useful there as well. And so we see that even on high-end phones, like on Android phones, we see that there are a lot of Mini users out there, even although they have the built-in WebKit browser or Opera Mobile to their disposal, they still also use Opera Mini aside or combined or exclusively so.
And Andrea, does Nokia have a similar kind of service? Is there an Avi?
Yeah. So the Avi browser that I mentioned earlier is what they call distributed user agent. So it works pretty much the same way as Opera Mini, where there is a proxy on the server side for us that fetches the page, computes, does everything compression, and then delivers to the client. And the reasons are pretty much the same, where small screen, low bandwidth, reduced cost, and reduced CPU.
So would you agree that it's not going away anytime soon? That's going to be a long-term trend?
Well, depends what you mean by long-term, but definitely right now there is a lot of interest in this type of technology, mostly for data usage and accessibility, basically, of remote servers. So it makes it easier.
Cool. Yeah. Okay, well, let's get into more sort of how devices deal with the web pages out there on the web. And one of the issues, of course, a lot of web pages aren't made for small screen devices, so you introduce zooming. But you could zoom in different ways. Some browsers would choose to literally reflow the text, maintain what's on the screen. Others would zoom so that the text is now going off the screen beyond the viewport. So if each of you could tell me what your particular browser does and why you went for that solution. Eli.
Okay, so our zooming is different on some of our different platforms, but if we look at the 6.0 WebKit browser that we've released, right now it does reflow text when you do a double tap zoom, so we call that a block zoom, and by default it will change the line breaks within a block level element that has text in it so that they fit on the screen if it fits within a reasonable set of parameters. So if you don't have to make the text too big or too small to do that, to make the line breaks too ridiculous. That feature can be turned off, but we've found that people don't want to scroll horizontally as a general rule. So that's why we did it. It's a slightly different implementation than what some of the other platforms are doing, particularly iOS and Android, but achieves basically the same result, that when you indicate that you want to focus on a block of text by double tapping on it, we make it so you don't have to scroll horizontally. That was the problem statement that we tried to solve. It has historically been done by much more drastic measures. On our 5.0 browser, we had something called column mode, which literally took all block level elements of the page and oriented them vertically. So the entire page does not require horizontal scrolling. As you can imagine, that makes web developers crazy, because it totally breaks your page layout, and we've tried to break your page layout as little as possible. On our larger screen devices, like on Playbook, we don't actually reflow text at all, because we haven't found it to be particularly necessary in talking to users on the larger screen.
Fair enough. And Andreas, Opera, what do you do with Opera Mobile?
Yeah, so I think, so this goes way back. There was mention of this, what was it called, column mode or something like that?
Yeah.
Did you call it? Yeah. So we had something similar, which we called small screen rendering, SSR, and nobody knows what it stands for whenever we have it in the UI. So now it's called, I believe, mobile view. It's still there in the options in Opera Mobile. So that also reflows everything in one long column, and it sort of alters the page. Web developers don't like this very much, and users are often confused, although we still see a lot of people using it, interestingly enough. So that is one way of dealing with it. The other way where we deal with it, so the browser ships with this mobile view or SSR mode turned off by default, so you get an experience where you get a full overview of the web page, and then you pinch to zoom. And then wherever you are, so that block of text gets actually reflowed and sort of fit nicely within the available screen width. We did a little alteration before, so let me go back one step. I believe in Opera Mobile 10, we did that before, so we didn't have pinch to zoom, we only had two-level zoom. So you were zoomed out or zoomed in, and then we would already pre-calculate, okay, this is how wide the text block is going to be when you zoom in, when you double tap. And then web developers and users were not very happy because you had these wide blobs of, sort of white space randomly over the web page, and they thought, oh, my blog or my website is broken. And then we always had to explain, well, no, it's just because there's two zoom levels, otherwise you would have to scroll left and right, and it would be really annoying. And then we experimented a bit with only doing it on tap, or only on tap and not when pinching. And then we saw, so that was in 10.1 beta, which came out in November. And then we thought, no, this is way too complicated. Nobody understands it anymore. And then we said, okay, let's just give the user the option. It's on by default, so you pinch, everything is reflowed. And if you turn it off, it doesn't reflow. And you can scroll left and right if you want, or just not zoom in too much. But so, yeah.
I remember you could actually use the small screen rendering even on the desktop browser.
Yes, that's correct.
Is that still in there?
No, it's not in there anymore. So also because it sort of, I believe it was listed as something like, it gave the impression that it was like a mobile emulator or a mobile view mode, which it wasn't really, because we didn't ship it anymore by default, and sort of people would be confused to think like, oh, that's how Opera renders mobile pages. Okay. So yeah, so that's why we didn't.
Don't use a desktop browser for testing mobile websites. Okay, fair enough. Andrea, reflow or zoom?
Good question. Nokia has a large variety of devices, so on the low end, if we're talking about the old browser, that was reflow because of the screen. And the same happens in Ovi browser, where the default behavior is to reflow. But actually, as much as Opera, you can just go into your settings and change it, and you will get an overview, and then you can zoom in. And the reason there, as much as the Symbian devices that are not touch, is mostly usability. So it is not very easy to point and zoom in. The double tap or zooming, pinch and zooming is so much easier, and with old devices with non-touch wasn't that easy. And so for consistency, even on touch devices right now, we zoom automatically onto what the browser thinks is the main content of the page, and we try to reflow it, let's say.
That does bring up an interesting point. Basically, we're trying to avoid, actual zooming when people are trying to navigate with keys or a joystick or whatever. But now that there are more and more touch devices, is that as much of an issue? I mean, maybe it's time to rethink it.
Well, right now, Nokia still is selling both. So even though the move is towards touch only, there are still devices, and even the browser 7.3 that is coming with Symbian Anna is actually being backported to the non-touch devices. So for consistency, we're now going with a mostly reflow. Now, if you have a very big image, you will still have to scroll left and right. Yeah. But we try to avoid that as much as possible.
Oh, fair enough. Actually, do you have any idea of the numbers of touchscreen devices, non-touchscreen devices that Nokia is shipping, planning to ship? It's okay if you don't. That's fine. That's fine.
I'm trying to think, because there were some, I don't know. We were talking about shipping 150 million Symbian 3. And all Symbian 3 are touch.
All of them, okay.
Yes, but that is going to be between the end of last year and next year.
Okay, so we will see. All right, enough pussyfooting around. Something I have to bring up because it's come up in the talks today, and I have the chance to talk to browser makers, have to bring this up. Device APIs, right? We web developers, we want access. Grant us access. Why don't we get native apps get to use stuff? Native apps get access to the contact details, address book, photo library, the camera, all this stuff. And it's coming. Why is it so hard? What's the problem here, Andrea?
We had device APIs in WRT for years now. The only point is that it was not standardized. So WRT came before even the W3C started doing the widget packaging and distribution. So at the time we were ahead of the curve, and then we never standardized towards what.
So how does it stand now for making a native app for?
WRT is a package that you develop, and it's web technology, so it's HTML and JavaScript.
So whether I'm making a website or making a native app, you're saying I have the same access to device APIs?
No, that's the thing. So in WRT you do. In the web browser you basically have access to.
It's the web browser I'm interested in.
Yes, I know. But I can even bring one more item to the discussion that was mentioned by Brian Leroux earlier, which was Qt Mobility. And through Qt, you can use Qt WebKit, and you have access to a bunch of APIs, sensors, a number of things. The point is that you still have to build a shell in Qt, but then once you fire the Qt WebKit, you have actually access to a lot of device APIs.
But I can't just visit a URL and have that URL have
not
access.
right now. No.
Why not?
Because we haven't done it yet.
Yet. Okay, that's good. Yet is the word I wanted to hear there. Andreas, is it hard?
Yeah, it is hard, I think. At Opera, we've been playing around with this for quite some years, mostly in the context of widgets. But still, you can't load those in the browser in a URL. So let me talk a bit about that. I think the geolocation API is a good example of something that came to the W3C, was agreed upon through, a process, W3C process. They always take time. But this one went fairly smooth, I think, and then implementations followed in desktop. I think 2 years ago there was not even a single browser with this in, and now we have it all on desktop, on mobile, and everywhere. So that's something that went really well. But it's not so easy to do that for all the APIs. So to give one example, a couple of, 2 months ago or so, or maybe even less, a couple of weeks ago, we created a special build of Opera Mobile with support for the device element.
That's right.
So we released a post about this, and so we said, look, we're going to do this, and we think this is very interesting. The device element would allow you to sort of hook into the camera on a phone, and I never really know what it is, the front face, so the one that points that way, not to your own face. And so you could play around with it and script it and do all kinds of stuff. And so we said, well, we're about to release this, and the moment we announced this on our core blog, the specification changed, literally the same day. Yeah. Probably as a bit of a reaction to, it's a lot of politics in these working groups and so on. There's always a lot of things going on.
Politics,
so anyways,
it's W3C.
Terrible, yeah.
No.
But that's a good example of, you want to ship something, but there is stuff so much changing, and very often this is significant investment. You have to decide in advance, okay, are we going to put a couple of people, a couple of man-months of work on this, knowing that it will change? And so in this case, we knew it. Luckily, we were well prepared, because 1 week later, we actually shipped the version public with the new Get User Media API implemented, and so that was there. It also had device orientation events and stuff like that. So we are experimenting with this. But if you try to build, it's quite interesting. You can play around with it. It's still a bit unstable. It's still a bit crashy. This specification is still changing. Yep. So is it ready for deployment in the real browser? Maybe yes. It will still need some work. What do you do, for instance, with privacy? Do you prompt the user every time? Oh, do you want to access this application or this website wants to access the camera? Are you fine with it? It's a whole other matter, different matter from this application wants to access your camera, because you get a sort of You have this point of control in between, which you don't have
You
with
install
websites.
the application.
You install the application.
But you just visited a website.
Exactly. So you've already sort of given consent, or So those kind of things are all more complicated, I think, than with native web apps, and that's why they take more time.
Yeah.
And that's why browser vendors are very interested. We love this kind of stuff. But at the same time, we also have to see, okay, what takes, what do we do first? There's so many things in the list, and
so I have to say, I was kind of disappointed that the device element got removed, and now it's pure JavaScript API, because I generally prefer declarative solutions. But you do bring up the whole point of if you try and innovate too far ahead, and you end up making something that's proprietary unintentionally, because you're going ahead of the standards, but then you're waiting for a standards body like the W3C to finish something you're waiting for years. So it does seem like there's this dance between implementation and specification. And that's not just with mobile stuff, obviously, that's browsers in general. So Eli, device APIs. Now, you got the hardware as well as the software, right? You kind of got that tie-in. That's got to help.
It definitely enables us to do things, but we're in a very similar situation to what these two guys have already talked about, where we do have a widget framework for web technology-based apps, WebWorks, that provides you access to almost 100% of the same APIs.
Sure, but we're interested in what happens when I go to a URL in the browser.
So most of our APIs that are accessible from an arbitrary website in the browser, we get from Upstream WebKit. So we work very closely with the Upstream WebKit project, and that means that things that go into the Upstream code base eventually will make their way into our browser as a general rule. That's not true for absolutely everything, which is why geolocation and that sort of thing is very well supported. None of the other mobile WebKit browser makers, other than the Qt browser, are upstream. So in particular, the mobile Safari WebKit and the Android WebKit are off in their own worlds, very far diverged, which is why it's hard to come to agreement on these sort of things. So we are participating in the W3C to get some standardizations on some of these things. A big restriction for us is that once we ship something, we are very stuck with it forever. And
so you want to get it right.
It's very, very hard for us to say the kind of things that Opera can. Hey, we're going to put out a dev build and have people try it and see what's going to happen, because we have to support it forever.
So making choices, those initial choices, you may rue the day further down the line. Speaking of making choices, you may rue video codecs. Which ones to support? Which ones not to support? Why? Why not? Technical reasons? Political reasons? So let's go on a Nokia browser. What if I have a video element, for example? What's going to play?
Yeah, so the Nokia browser doesn't play anything embedded. In HTML5, there's no support for that. But anyway, usually what is supported, so you can download it and play it offline, or you can play it in a Qt application. It's H.264 is usually supported.
So you are paying the piper. You are paying the.
Not only that, we're also paying Adobe, so you can also play Flashlight video. Okay. So we're paying everyone except the free one that is Google. We're not doing that.
Okay. Yeah. But you're not going to support that?
For now, no. So it's not in the devices right now. No.
So you like to pay money?
Yeah. But then we charge it on the customers.
Right. Okay. Fair. So you think if it's free, it can't be any good? That's basically your philosophy.
No,
okay.
no. At this stage, of course, there's for example, a chip reasoning where chips have hardware acceleration, for example, for H.264.
Is that mainly the reason then? It's because of hardware acceleration?
Well, right now it is one of the reasons, yes. And the other is that we've tested and used it for years, and we know how it works and everything. WebM, for example, is still a new technology and hasn't been tested enough for us to add.
So it's like a wait-and-see attitude with WebM.
Yeah, okay. I mean, it could come. If it is a better standard, I don't see why we wouldn't. But at this stage, H.264 is the kind of safe horse.
Okay. You might want to work on that video element support as well.
Yes.
I want to get that in there. That'd be good.
But you can try it in a Qt application.
Yeah, I'm interested in going to URLs in a web browser. I don't know how often
I'll send you a line of code of
I know you all love your little, wrap this stuff up in a standalone thing.
And you can sell it on the App Store.
Yeah, so you can monetize. Right. No, I want to go to something in a URL in a web browser and have it just work. Am I asking too much? Apparently. So, video codecs. Obviously, okay, so you're in an interesting position because you, as well as making this mobile browser, Opera Mobile, you also make the desktop browser. I take it it's the same factors factor into what you do and don't support?
Yes and no. So there's a couple of differences. On desktop we have Octr support and WebM support. On mobile there is no Octr support, but we do support WebM from Android 2.3 and onward. So Opera Mobile running on Android 2.3 will be able to launch or play WebM video in the native player. So we hand it off when there's a video element with a WebM URL or source linked from it. You click on it and then it will launch the native video player that's available on the device. So you don't have to download it first and then play it. It starts playing right away. There is, in the other Android devices, but also in all Android phones basically, we also support H.264 because it's already present on the system. So we just, the same there, we hand it off to the system and, So
the system's doing all the work?
The system's doing all the work, basically. So if you want to run, inline video support is not, inside the page is not yet, we don't have that yet. So there's performance issues mostly. You mentioned also hardware acceleration. For instance, WebM doesn't have this yet. It might be coming. I'm not entirely sure how close that is, but there's an issue there. So we don't have that running yet. So probably if you really need inline video on your mobile application, your only choice is probably Flash for now, which runs, but well, it's Flash. So,
yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a shame.
Yeah.
Can I watch a video on my BlackBerry?
So in our in-market handhelds right now on 6.0, we do not have support for the HTML5 video element. On Playbook, which just came out in the last month, we do. It supports H.264.
So you're paying the piper as well?
Yes.
Okay.
And similar to Opera, I guess from my perspective, we hand it off to the system. So QNX has this very nice video playback API, and the codecs all come from there.
So you really aren't making those decisions about which codecs, it's the system that...
As the browser team, we are not involved in that decision.
Okay, fair enough.
But embedded video works very well in the Playbook browser, and will be coming to the BlackBerry 7.
So still on sort of technical details, something else that web developers might occasionally mention that they're interested in, a little CSS declaration, position fixed. Now, I mentioned that this is happening at the same time as Google I/O, and I think the Android guys were quite excited to announce that they now do support position fixed. So, has the bar been raised? Do you need to get on that?
In BlackBerry 6, again, the in-market one, we support position fixed the same way that Android used to, which is when you scroll, the position fixed scrolls with the page and then jumps back afterwards, which is not what anybody wants.
Yeah.
But in the Playbook browser, we have true fixed position support. If you put position fixed on something, it will be fixed for real, and the page can scroll underneath it and be fast. And that will be coming to BlackBerry 7.
Okay, good. Glad to hear it.
And I still haven't seen it running on Android, so as far as I know, we are the only mobile browser in market that does support that.
Oh, yes, a pissing competition, just what we want. Andrea?
Yep. In Opera, we do the same. So it's sort of fixed, as in, when you scroll, it's still stuck to the page, and then when you stop scrolling, it jumps back into place. Indeed, not particularly smooth.
Is it really that hard? I mean, I don't make a browser.
It is very hard. So to be honest, I'm also not. So it's fairly complicated because it relates to. So, well, how to say this simply? Basically, if you make a mobile browser, there's a lot of hacks involved in sort of getting, or a lot of tricks involved, let me say it like that, to make this, to do the viewport stuff and the zooming and all that. And so you have to calculate a whole lot of things, and there's a number of layers. So, for instance, what do you do when So for instance, if you have a web page with a viewport meta tag and then what is position fixed, well, there it's fairly obvious what should happen. Like you always want this bar to stay at the top regardless if you scroll the page. But if you also zoom at the same time, and then what should happen then, and what if a whole, say, sidebar with a lot of elements is fixed? So there's a lot of calculations to be done there, and it seems, so in our older infrastructure, in our older way of rendering web pages on mobile, which was pre-Opera Mobile 11, that would have been basically impossible to do, to support position fixed. However, now with Opera Mobile 11, we have, if you pan, it goes very fast, and so that's because we have a new way of putting the layout and everything in place. They're calculating it, and so now they're thinking, so we haven't done it yet, but I was talking to developers a couple of weeks ago, and then they said, well, there is a possibility we can actually get this to work properly. So
Things might beat these guys to the punch? You might get it out in time? I'm
not sure yet, but yeah, we'll definitely try. But so I don't think it's that far away. I'm not going to make promises, but yeah, it seems to be less impossible than it was before.
Okay.
So that's very vague, isn't it? Yeah. So anyways.
Andrea, you got position fixed for us?
In 7.3.
Okay.
So the one that is coming soon, yes. It mostly works, but I would agree with Andreas. Sometimes you might have some.
There's a lot of things I'm clearly not thinking of. It's a lot. It's not as simple as it sounds.
Yeah, you might get it wrong if you zoom and move.
Yeah.
I can maybe give you just a little bit more detail on that. So right now, there's the big question about what to do with zooming and position fixed together. Mm-hmm. Should you zoom the fixed position element or should you not? If you zoom the fixed position element and it's stuck to the side of the screen, eventually it's the whole screen and then you can't get to any content underneath it.
It sounds a lot like frames, not all the complicated stuff that came along with frames. There's more to it than...
I think that there will have to be some evolution in the standard to decide what to do when you combine those two things. Right now, mobile browser zooming is kind of just a layer on top of existing web standards, so everyone does something a little bit different with text reflow.
I as an author, can't specify how I want the mobile browser to zoom.
So I'm trying to actually do some prototypes right now on some interesting things that we could do with fixed positioning and zooming together, but we don't have anything done yet. We also, some of the things that we try to do with fixed positioning on the existing browser, where it does zoom, by the way, are very complicated because of the layout. So there are some limitations where you do have to fall back to the jumping behavior that nobody likes, but eventually does get you something fixed. Okay. But some of the partners that we're working with on the frameworks, like jQuery, have started...
I'm going to stop you there, because it's getting boring.
Okay.
I wanted to talk about calculating, because, come on, time's pressing. We don't want to spend all the time on these technical things. I'm sorry. We have one more little quick technical question about it. When you're calculating, how big to make a page to fit on a mobile browser, I, as an author, can specify, in a meta element, I can use the viewport with, I can say, device with, whatever. Now, for Opera, you also support a way for me to do that in the CSS, which is the @viewport. It's not a selector, a declaration, block, whatever. Why? What's wrong with the meta element?
So we felt strongly that, the meta element was sort of a bit of it's a little bit of a hack to override specific browser behavior. Originally, so it was defined by the iPhone. It came to other browsers as well. We also implemented it, played around with it a bit, and then we felt, well, this is actually more something that belongs in CSS because you're controlling the layout, the width, or in a way the width.
So it's like you're crossing the streams by having this presentational instruction
element
in the markup.
Inside the markup. Yeah. So that's what we were feeling. So we tried to Rune Lillesveen of Opera. He worked a lot on our viewport implementation, and he made a proposal to the CSS working group called. I'm not sure anymore what it's called. Device. Sorry. Yeah, device adaptation. Thank you. Device adaptation, so that defines that viewport rule, where you put basically it's sort of a mapping of all the all the properties in the viewport meta tag, but you convert them to CSS. So not all of it is the same. So a lot of them look similar. You have certain things that are different, like initial scale, for instance, becomes zoom, because I believe IE has a sort of zoom
It does
proper,
indeed.
yeah. So
yes.
so we try to see there what makes sense. I'm not sure yet if that will be the final naming, but for now, so we implemented it like that.
Yeah, it makes sense when you put it like that. That it's presentational, so it doesn't belong in the markup layer.
So, and the interesting thing is Patrick Lauke, one of the guys on my team, he's been experimenting with applying viewport conditionally dependent on media queries.
Yep.
So you can change the viewport dynamically depending on the size of the screen. So
Right. Because otherwise you'd have to use JavaScript to edit the meta element.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
Server-side detection.
Yeah.
I mean, you must use server-side detection otherwise to set the right viewport size, which can be a problem. And that's also why viewport is kind of developing into a little bit of a monster with DPI and scalability and initial scale.
Do I detect that you're wary of implementing it, perhaps?
No, you're wrong, because we have it in the C7. It's already implemented.
Excellent.
It's in market in the US, and it's coming to 7.3. But we are facing pretty much the same problems where there are developers that design websites for the iPhone or for some specific Android devices supporting a certain width, and then it doesn't work. We've seen funny pages where they define the viewport, they define you cannot scale it even though without defining the width. So our device, sets it right, but then the images in the page are actually a fixed width of exactly the size of the iPhone screen.
Yeah.
So then the page looks odd because you have the text flowed right to fill the screen, but the images don't fit.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
Yeah, we have exactly the same problem, actually. We see a lot of sites that use, first they use width 320, and then, they heard, width equals device width is better, but then they forgot to adjust their images, and then everything starts becoming funky. Yeah. Once you look at it on screens that are not exactly iPhone sizes.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You guys, any plans for this?
We do support the viewport meta tag.
The meta tag, sure, but what about shifting it out of?
We don't support the CSS right now, just because there's no real agreement on it, and we're
we
watching what develops there.
Oh, I'm sorry, I
we support
misinterpreted.
the
I thought you were
meta
saying
tag
you
as well.
supported
No,
the CS.
sorry. My
I'm
bad.
disappointed now.
No. Yeah.
So are Opera the only people that have...
It's a fairly recent specification, so I'm not surprised that...
Okay.
Wasn't the meta tag something that came in the last few weeks as a W3C thing? I don't know about when you guys implemented it, but in W3C mailing lists, it's...
In theory, it does make sense, right, to take it out of markup and put it into the presentation layer. Can we at least
have no fundamental opposition to that.
Okay, that's as good as I can hope for, I guess.
I mean, the meta tag is turning into kind of a disaster right now. It was overspecified when Apple first released it, so everybody has different behavior in the edge cases.
Yep.
And so most of the sites out there were copied and pasted from a few early blog articles about, hey, you should use this combination of things. And everybody's especially behavior under specifying a height and then rotating the device, that kind of thing was different. So
even something simple like the limiters between viewport values in the meta tag.
Right, it's commas, semicolons.
So it please use commas, don't use semicolons. It's not CSS. Because we've seen this on older Opera versions, I believe Opera Mobile 9.5 or so, we only supported the commas and not the semicolons, so then you won't get viewport.
There's a large number of top 50 sites that are using semicolons, and it's very annoying.
Yeah.
So making browsers hard.
So there's somebody who did this blog post, and everybody just copy-pasted from there, and it continues haunting us. So
Yeah, I guess I don't give you guys enough credit. There's a lot to consider that I guess I don't realize when I'm ragging on you guys. I mean, somebody wanted to bring up the subject of DPI and media queries and resolutions, PPK. Somebody thought this might be an interesting subject. I don't know. Can't say it's something I've ever thought about, but it does seem like there's a lot of variance, like which browsers report back different things about DPI. Is that another sort of minefield of...
It sometimes is, and Nokia, I think, is the one actually most at risk because we do any possible screen size, from tiny to big. So it gets complicated, and the other thing is that the user expects it just to work.
Yep.
And so you end up in a minefield where you either do what the developers say, but then they designed it for another device and it doesn't quite work on yours. So the guy that just bought the new fresh phone, he doesn't see nice. Or you adapt it and then the developer is pissed because it doesn't do what the developer said. Because there are a lot of sites that define the width. For example, using the viewport, they say it's not scalable. Then we have devices with a high DPI. What do? We show it this small, or we adapt it and piss off the developer.
Yeah.
And there's
damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, so this kind of keeps coming up a lot. It keeps saying, developers make a site for mobile, but actually what they're making the site for is iOS, maybe Android. I mean, that came up in one of the slides today as well. I sense frustration. I sense a certain amount of frustration. How do you deal with that? Are you always going to be playing catch-up to iOS and Android? Not because of their platforms, but because that's what developers are developing for. I mean, Opera on the desktop. You had the situation on the desktop where you had to fake your UI string.
So we've a lot of experience with that.
Yeah.
It's not easy. We obviously don't want to be running after developers and say, hey, don't forget about Opera and adapt your code. A good start. Well, what we often see is that developers only test in WebKit, so they use -WebKit- prefix properties, and so that obviously it doesn't work in any other in non-WebKit browsers. So a good practice there is to just include everything and include also generic fallbacks, those kind of things. So we try to document that, talk about it, learn about pitfalls. But
Dev.opera is a good resource for this stuff.
So that's what we try to do, and so it's a matter of education, I think, and I think also, the more devices we'll see right now, it's only the iPhone or the iPad that they've bought and they're looking at, but I think also all the Android devices, or say the BlackBerry Playbook, and so it's great to see some competition in the space, because that will force them to see, this is also a very compelling and interesting device. I shouldn't only look at iPhone or iDevices to develop on, but because there's a much wider gamma of devices out there that people will use.
People start to realize.
And I think, say in the developing world or in markets with a low, where Apple's penetration is lower, we'll see that this is much more important even. So,
Eli and Andrea, do you have it a little bit easier because you are WebKit based, and so there is a lot of commonality with, somebody develops a site and only tests on iOS or Android, maybe both.
One of our biggest problems on Playbook with that is that people are UA string detecting and not sending us the page that they designed for iPad. And if they just sent us the page that they designed for iPad, it would be fine. So we have a fair amount of work talking to content developers and making them not send us WML. So this question of WebKit compatibility across everything, I think, is pretty good. Also, to get back to the original question a little bit, DPI adjustments. So Android put in some target density DPI attribute into the meta viewport tag to deal with the fact that there are multiple classes of Android devices, right? And we are in a similar situation to Nokia in that we have devices with a wide range of screen resolutions and densities. So we're basically going down a similar path to what Android has done with the target density meta viewport. But in general, we try not to do hacks like pretend we're 320 pixels wide and scale it or anything like that. We tell you what we are, and all of the JavaScript functions return the real numbers, and you can design your site to do the right thing.
So this does bring up the whole question of UA sniffing. A useful tool for developers or a spawn of Satan? Which is it? I don't
have a very hard line on UA string detecting. I think that there are good reasons why you would want to do some server-side detection.
Were you around in the 90s?
Yes.
Okay.
And it was definitely abused. But, we have people who are on plans where their data is very expensive, and so sending down a lot of JavaScript code to detect what they are and adapt at runtime isn't necessarily the best option for everybody. But we would love people to do less drastic things with UA string detecting than they're doing now.
I would take it that Opera would not be a fan of
Yeah, so we're also not a fan. We recommend developers to do feature detection, see if capabilities are available in the browser, on the device, and otherwise serve fallback content. So that's what we generally recommend. We have a lot of issues also with, UA sniffing gone wrong.
Yeah.
For instance, if you look at our UA string, it starts Opera 9.8 and then will end with version 11.10. You'll wonder why is that. The reason is because if we would say Opera 11.10 in the beginning, there are certain JavaScript scripts that interpret 11 as 1 because they only read the first digit, and then we don't get.
They tell you
the
to
right
upgrade
code.
to Internet Explorer 3 or
so
something.
they say, please upgrade because you're in I don't know when in 1996 or so.
Yeah.
So it's very rough. And actually, every release that we do, there's a whole discussion always about what are we going to do with the user agent string? Should we call it like this or like that? And yeah. So
somebody tweeted about this recently. A user agent string isn't just a user agent string. It's a history of the web.
Oh yeah,
standards.
So for instance, for Opera Mini that runs on tablets, we had to call it. We couldn't call it Opera Mini Tablet because otherwise we would get Opera Mini content. We couldn't call it Opera Tablet Mini because then we would get Opera Tablet content that possibly wouldn't work. So we called it Opera Min Tablet, which is very weird. I proposed calling it Opera Maxi, but nobody liked that. So then it became Opera Min Tablet.
But in general, can we agree that feature detection is going to be better than browser detection?
Well, at Nokia, we don't preclude anything, and in the documentation, we're always going to explain exactly how to detect even the individual browser or platform if you want to do that.
You don't take any moral stand on that, whether you're doing a good thing or a bad thing, whether you're educating or miseducating developers by doing that?
Well, we work with the W3C standards, and we provide all the means to also use feature detection if you like it better that way. And of course, sometimes people just detect Nokia as the first 5 characters and send us WML. And that's a shame, but it goes with education as well.
You said on the one hand you're saying, well, we leave it up to the developers. You can do feature detection, you can do user agent detection. But then I'm hearing these horror stories from you guys about bad scripts that developers wrote because they copy and pasted some code. You can't have it both ways. I think maybe you should take a stand. Maybe you should have a position on this and say, we think this is the right way to do it, and this is not so right. Evil, even, one might say. But no, you're going to be totally agnostic about it? You're going to...
Things can go wrong in any way. You can feature detect it wrong, or you can get your JavaScript broken. So.
Okay. You're being very diplomatic, right? You're being Switzerland here. You're like, I don't want to come down on one side or the other. Well, I think, Opera, you kind of do some education, some outreach, and saying, in terms of best practices. That's what we're talking about here, rather than what you can do.
Yeah. Well, I would say today it's a better practice to do feature detection.
You would say that here. You would say that on the website, in the documentation?
I would say it here on stage.
Okay. It'd be good to see that written down in the documentation for developers.
It might come.
Okay, good. That would be nice. I mean, this does bring up the whole issue of outreach and education for developers, like me, right? I need to know about this stuff. What do you do? What resources have you got? I'm familiar with Opera's dev site. I haven't been to anything.
On the BlackBerry Dev Zone, there's a fair amount of content for both reference content for how the web engines work on 6.0 and 5.0, and on best practices. We also have a number of people out at different web conferences giving talks on do's and don'ts of the mobile web and that kind of thing.
Good. Glad to hear it. Yeah. Well, that's good. In terms of outreach, it came up again today, the sheer cost of trying to test on so many mobile devices. It is prohibitive, and so you can hardly blame developers when they do only test on the iPhone or the Android phone that they have in front of them. Do you guys want to give away any free phones to developers?
We are giving away free phones.
Yeah, we did.
More than as a policy, anything along those lines. Well, for example, let me tell you, there's a project being started up in Portland right now where a bunch of different agencies will pool together to create essentially a pool of mobile devices that people could share. Now, would you be interested in supporting projects like that by contributing device. Be good PR. Be really good PR for your company.
So Nokia has a program actually called Remote Device Access. It works pretty much like Device Anywhere, and it's free. You just book some time, and we have 100 or 200 devices
Is there
available.
much paperwork involved?
No,
shipping,
no
getting
paper.
it? Okay.
Zero paper. No, you book the time online. So
I see.
You just go in and you say, I want to try a Nokia N8, and it tells you, we have these slots at this time of today, tomorrow, whatever. You can book, I think, a few days in advance. Like
Where do I physically need to be to do that?
anywhere on internet. It's a Java applet that runs in your browser.
Okay, but in terms of getting hold of an actual device, getting hold of a phone, getting phones into the hands of developers.
We're not doing it, but I think, if I recall correctly, there's a company in France that does that. It's it's a consortium of a bunch of companies that did that, and you buy a subscription for like €100 a year, and then you can just go there and try the phones, or you can get them to test it for you.
Okay. Because I'm very intrigued by this idea of having a community pool of devices to test. So I'm watching the Portland experiment with great interest. I might try and start it up in Brighton if you guys could help out. Be good. Send us some phones. Be good. Okay, you don't want to commit yourselves, I see. That's fine. That's fine. You don't know what I'm not getting for Christmas.
I don't know if maybe it's worth mentioning here. So we, being a browser maker, we don't have we have to buy these devices ourselves as well. So we're not ready to give them away. But what we've been working on, and that's going to be released soon, is we have an Opera mobile emulator, which is actually not an emulator. We just call it an emulator because that's the easiest way to explain it. It's basically Opera mobile running on your desktop. And you can choose a profile and DPI and all kinds of zoom settings or keypad input, touch input or whatnot, and then just run it on your desktop, basically. And it would show, what it would do on the phone. So in a way that's maybe even more useful than the actual device. And it has, it doesn't have
the word emulator generally has bad connotations for most of us, I think.
It sounds a bit scary, but it's actually better than you would think. So if you haven't tried it, then
I'll give it a try.
Yeah.
But I'd still like phones. Phones would be nice. Listen, we'll open it up to the audience now if you're ready. I'll just ask one more question up here, but have some get ready for your questions, because I've kind of kept steering you guys away from this. You clearly want to talk about it, but this whole idea of taking a web app, and wrapping it up in something, some wrapper, that you can then stick it on your home screen, and now it's like a native app. Isn't that wonderful? So what are you getting behind there? Can we standardize on something here, or are you all going different proprietary directions? What's the wrapper that I can have on Nokia to make my website into a app?
Right now, today, you can develop a Qt application and can be just merely a wrapper that starts Qt WebKit, and that gives you access already to HTML5 device APIs through the Qt Mobility. And you do have access to that type of information. And we still have active in the devices the WRT, Web Runtime. With the browser update, it will also update the WebKit engine behind it, and it also allows you to collect all your requests. It was quite interesting earlier talking about permissions.
Yep.
And do you want to give me access to contacts? Yes, and position, and this and that. Finally, we are going to have one request for everything in WRT for whatever it is. And then, of course, we are looking into WAC if we have to, and what is the interest there.
With Opera, I think you've shown a lot of interest in the W3C widget spec, right?
Yeah, so we've been driving that for a while. We've sold widget runtimes to a number of operators, such as Vodafone. We also have a project on WAC with Telenor. There's cooperation with other telephone operators as well. But so they maintain an ecosystem of apps built with standards. So you basically built with whatever you usually use for websites, and then wrap it up in W3C widgets as a W3C widget and upload it to their store. So that's how it works. So this is problem or it doesn't have that much visibility because very often this is tied to certain specific markets and say, for instance. Vodafone is active, not only in the UK, but in a lot of other markets as well. So it doesn't get, I know for instance they shipped mini widgets in certain markets in Africa, which nobody here has heard about, but they're known. So there are a number of ways on building apps and getting access to
wrapping it up.
Yeah, exactly, wrapping it up. And
you decided not to go with the W3C widget spec?
We have our WebWorks, both on handheld, back to 5.0, and on Playbook. WebWorks is very, very similar to W3C widgets.
They all sound very similar.
It's basically a superset that includes the security and permissions aspects that standard doesn't cover. And right now we're seeing huge uptake of WebWorks applications. So I think right now the numbers are over 25% of apps submitted on the BlackBerry App World for Playbook are web apps.
And I do understand it. I do understand why people want to have an app. You know, ooh, pick me, put me on your home screen. You know, make my website into an app so you can put on your home screen. But I sometimes wonder, this desire to create all these separate silos of, you know, standalone applications that sit in your home screen. Don't we then lose some of what makes the web great? Addressability, linkability, the fact that you have a URL, the fact that anybody could link to that. How do I link to an app? You know, does anybody else think that it's not this wonderful gold rush of standalone apps, that we're losing the very thing that makes the web great? Just me?
Well, I think that there's...
Thank you.
I think that there's also a range. So from opening up your browser and typing in a URL to a full-fledged application that you can't tell isn't native. There are like save to home screen type things. Apple's done a little bit of work there, and we have support for that on all of our platforms now, where you can take a website and save it to the home screen, and then using some meta tags you can override what the icon is and that kind of thing. So you can have a halfway app.
You can't link to.
Well, I mean, to some extent that's a URL, so you could link to it. But I don't really know what it means to link to an app.
Exactly. That's kind of the point.
Like, it's not like there's something that people want to do that we're not enabling. I just don't know what it means.
That's what surprised me, that people do want to do this, I guess. It's like, we had CD-ROMs. They kind of sucked. Now we had the web. It was awesome. And we were like, no, let's go back to, having individual things that can't communicate with other things. It surprises me. It surprised me that there is this desire. I guess maybe it is a monetization thing, the fact that you can wrap it up and sell it for money. Mm-hmm. I mean, you clearly do see a desire as well. You see lots of people want to do this, want to build standalone, wrapped up.
Well, definitely users like the idea of the application installed as the home screen button, or, for example, on Symbian, you can have this web clips basically in your home screen. So
citation needed. I think I'd like to see the numbers on how many actually get added to the home screen from users, but that would be a big study.
Well, it's hard to tell because we don't look into the.
Isn't there a danger here? We're just perpetuating it, right? We're just saying, clearly users want to have things that behave like apps, so we're going to allow developers to make websites, but then wrap them up, behave as apps that sit on a home screen. And then users come to expect that, because the reason why users want something to snap, because they've learned when they first turned on their mobile phone a couple of years ago that the web sucks when I use my mobile device. And actually that's no longer the case. The web on a mobile device can be awesome, but we're encouraging the cycle of I don't want to go to the browser. Ooh, no, don't type in a URL. Ooh, no, nasty. You want something nice and wrapped up on the home screen.
But device APIs aside, save to home screen plus app cache plus local storage is pretty much an app. But it's a website, right? It's all web technologies, and there's a URL and all of that sort of thing.
And all of that should be doable in the browser as well. I mean, app cache.
And on our platforms, all of that is doable in the browser.
So maybe we'll see less of that. We'll see this craze for adding to home screen fade off as people realize, actually, I need one app on my home screen, and that's my web browser. Yeah. Okay, that's my little rant over. Questions? Let's see some hands up. Oh, I definitely want to get the question down here. So at the very back of the room, very, very back. Keep the hand up, please, Liza. If you could keep your hand up, so that we. There we go. That's great.
Hi, I'm one of the people in Portland. I have a question for people who suggest remote device testing. Have you ever tried it? As Brian LaRue would say, it made me want to set myself on fire. So I'm hoping that we can, convince some of the device manufacturers and carriers that this is a real winning situation for everyone. We want to make stuff, so we hope we can work with you and get some great devices. Thanks.
Any responses? You don't have to respond. You can just sit here and take it. That's fine. That's good.
I did try the remote device access, sure. It is not as having a device, but for example, I don't pay for data if I use the remote device access, and I can test a range of devices, a range of networks. Having the device, having someone bringing the device to me at home or shipping me to Norway to test it would be better.
You can't beat it, right? You got it. It's nothing beats having the phone in your hand. Yeah. Okay. Any other? We got one here. Okay.
I have a question.
Could you bring the microphone closer?
Sorry, I have a question for Andrea Trasatti.
Yeah.
You mentioned the new browser, the new WebKit browser at Nokia. How many of the existing devices will be updatable to that version, and how will those updates be pushed?
Yeah, so the browser update is going to be for all Symbian 3 devices and all S65th edition and 3rd edition, which means the old Symbian devices that had the touchscreen and the generation just before that. So we're talking like up to 3 devices sold about 3 years ago. And for Symbian, for Symbian 3, the update will be pushed as a suggested update for the whole firmware. So when you plug in your phone and you have the OV suite running, you can get it, or you can get the over-the-air update. And for the other systems, it will just be the browser that gets updated.
That brings up the whole question of auto updates. Do you do it? If not, why not? I mean, with BlackBerry, would you automatically push out an update without asking?
Historically, on the handheld, we haven't done a lot of in-market updating. Most devices have gotten about one update, a major update, but about one update in its life cycle. And with Playbook, I hope we're convincing people that we are changing that drastically. So it's been out for about 3 weeks, and there's been 3 major updates so far.
But it doesn't happen automatically.
Well, you get a notification that there is an update, and then you can click yes.
I guess with Opera, you may be in a tougher position because you don't have access to the hardware.
No, but say for instance, the Android market allows you to push updates, and so we're pretty confident that I think most of the user base on Android will get the latest version sooner or later. So that's the way we update.
Good.
There's also one other way, which is we have this mechanism called browser.js, which is in the browser. It's a sort of huge JavaScript file that includes a number of small tweaks and patches for websites that don't function properly in Opera because they serve as the wrong content, or they think we are,
So you constantly need to keep that
so
updated.
we keep that updated. We maintain that. So but those are small tweaks, but those go live. The user doesn't need to do anything. This just happens automatically.
Yeah. I mean, I think in general, auto updating is probably a good idea.
Yeah.
I mean, mobile, desktop, it seems, and that does seem to be a trend. Chrome just updates constantly.
There's a big trend for it. It's also good because it makes web developers' life easier because they don't have to think about, this doesn't work on whatever, just a few betas back, or a 0.1 version back, it doesn't work, and now it does work, and how many users are still on that old version. So it's very good, I think.
Yeah, if only we could invent a time machine, go back to Redmond and convince them that would have been a great thing to do with Internet Explorer. We had a follow-on.
Just one more thing regarding regarding the previous question. Do you really know what a developer goes through when we do testing for mobile? Because I was in this particular situation. We had to test, and we wanted to include more devices that we support. So we went through tests for cloud-based testing and desktop apps that support different, the ones that support iOS and everything. We tried everything, and it's not working.
It's not the same.
It's not working. So are you going to do anything about it to help us?
So I hope you guys are getting the message here, right?
We've been getting this message for a long time, especially from the web community. We know that web developers like using Notepad and Firefox on their desktop to do all of their development, and that message has strongly gotten across to the tooling teams at RIM. We know that people don't like our simulators, so stay tuned.
You kind of get a free pass because you don't make hardware, but I mean, also I will say we can meet them halfway, and projects like the Portland Community Project, and I'd like to maybe try my hand at starting one up in Brighton would be good if there was a discount rate or something.
I personally try to give away as many devices as they'll let me.
Good. I'll get your card later. That'll be really useful. Okay, good.
Nokia actually has a program.
Okay.
Requires paperwork, but you can get advanced devices and discounted devices.
Okay, this is
And
good.
it's called Launchpad.
Okay. So I think we as developers, maybe we need to start a wiki or something so we can, get together with people in your local community. It could be just a good community project generally, and say let's build a pool of devices, right? And then maybe they can meet us halfway in terms of giving us discounted or free devices. We'll see. We had another question over here. Jen.
One of the things that maybe could be done is something like neighborhood goods could be used as a way to trade back devices, because I have a closet right now of devices, and if someone in the LA area needed to borrow...
Oh, right. So neighborgoods.net?
Neighborhoodgoods.net. It's Mickey Kremel's project.
I think that's US only, right?
Yeah, but I think they're expanding.
Okay. That's true. Neighbor goods is basically like... you go on and you go, I need a drill, and somebody else says, I have a drill. That's pretty much it, and it's really, really useful. No, it's awesome. That is genuinely disruptive technology, and doing that for mobile phones, it sounds simple, but that would be awesome. It's awesome. Neighbor goods is awesome. Who was first over here?
I have a question. I'm aware it's a very big one, and the big player on it is not here, being Apple, but so far nothing has been said about the micro problems of typography, web fonts, and there's a lot being done, but there is way more to be done. And especially on micro devices, like simple things, hyphenation, which small columns, narrow type, is especially something to be addressed on. But finding in hyphenated words, which is not sufficiently covered. Font face, yes, there's some consistency about font files now, although it's not OpenType at all. How about OpenType features? How about kerning? How about being sure that text flows equally on different browsers, etc. It's a very big question.
It has to be said that having heard what goes into making a mobile browser today and trying to figure out how much space to allocate and zooming and all this stuff, it does sound very, very hard to figure it out. But I will also say that when we talk about mobile development, we do tend to focus on apps, and we're talking about device APIs. Obviously, we care about that. But the reading experience is neglected, I would say. Now, whether this is at a device level or a browser level, this does speak to the larger issues. Where do you prioritize? Where do you decide to put your efforts? You say, okay, we've got to really work on getting these, sexy device APIs into the next release, or do you say, let's work on good hyphenation web fonts, support for the shy hyphen, something like that. How do you prioritize features, and where does good typography fall in your prioritization list?
If you want to go first.
So for Playbook, the original release there, and for BlackBerry 7, our biggest focus is on graphics performance. It's been a major thing that people have wanted, better CSS animations, that sort of better SVG rendering, that kind of thing. But definitely typography is on my list.
Okay. It's on your personal list.
It is on my personal list.
Is there a list, like a public list of, this is what RIM plans to support in the next release, which will be released on this date, and this is what we'll have?
No.
Do you not think that might be useful?
Sure.
Let me rephrase the question. Why don't you have a milestone list, or just here's what's coming in the next release document publicly?
That's a good question. I don't have the answer for you. I'm sorry.
Okay. I mean, to be fair, they aren't the only ones that clam up when it comes to release cycles or what's going to be in the next version. But I think most companies are not doing it because most companies are not doing it. In other words, they look around and say, well, our competition isn't saying anything. We better keep stum about what we plan to release. Do you publish milestones and do you put like, yes, we're going to have web fonts in this next release, we're going to do...
Yeah, so at Opera development, it happens on a number of tracks at the same time. So there's a core engine that is being developed constantly, and so they release regular milestones. All the documentation is published on opera.com/docs/specs. And so that's usually a little bit ahead of what you see in the actual Opera browser on desktop, and even more ahead for mobile. So because
so
mobile
is a way of us seeing what's coming down the line.
Yeah, so you can see there and say, hey, there is support coming up for this or that feature, and that's probably going to land soon in a desktop or Opera mobile. That will be released soon. So that gives you an idea. I think the problem we try to document that, keep it as up to date as possible. And so for the ones really interested, if you look in the user agent string, there's a last digits. Right now we are about at milestone 141, I believe. And mobile is at 81, so there's a bunch of things in the pipeline. Actually, looking at that, you can see that, say for instance, gradients, CSS3 gradients will come to mobile soon, and things like that. Okay. So that gives you a preview. I think the reason, and that's probably also true for everybody, at least for Opera, I think we don't really announce like we're going to release then with these and these features, because very often this changes so much that even internally we sometimes have a hard time keeping up for like, is that in or not?
Right.
Or,
so you don't even know what.
Yeah. So sometimes it's in the core, it's in Presto, but there's platform work needed. Say for instance, video is a typical example. There could be video support, but if you're not doing anything intelligent with handing over the video to the native player, then it's not going to work. And so there's more. So because of the standard support becoming more and more complex, and it's not only about, hey, this isn't a rendering engine, and now I don't know, bold text with B tags around it is now bold, and that works just everywhere.
You're just trying to protect us. You're don't want to hurt us by saying, oh,
maybe it's sort of to keep expectations in check, right, I think, okay. and simply sometimes because we don't know ourselves. So it comes along, and sometimes things take more time than others, and so that's why there's a bit of uncertainty, I think.
In general, though, Andre, how do you decide what to prioritize? Is it do you listen to what web developers are asking for, or are you always playing catch-up and looking what's out there on the web, because web developers are actually just making sites for iPhone and Android and just making sure your browser can render those sites? How do you prioritize?
It's a combination of many things. So we try to collect feedback as much as we can from the Forum Nokia perspective.
From blogs, mailing lists, Twitter, where do you look for this?
Anywhere. I mean, conferences and meeting people and talking and listening about what people talk about in conferences and stuff like that. So we try to listen, keep our ears open. We also have the platform. So since we're developing everything from the hardware to the highest layers. It also depends on whatever chips are in the next devices, whatever libraries are included in the next devices. So, for example, font faces, whatever is pre-installed in the platform is what comes in the browser. And the browser doesn't have the freedom of saying, hey, we also want this other font face because it's cool.
So I guess you're talking about fonts as opposed to font face to declaration are two separate things. You're talking about the system fonts that you get.
Yes.
Okay.
So
that's something different.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the browser doesn't have the freedom of saying we want to add another one. Of course, the installing third parties.
Okay. And do you guys publish a roadmap of here's what we plan?
No.
Interesting.
So I guess maybe one more point to that is that we do track upstream WebKit a fair amount. So and so does the Qt WebKit port. So things that happen.
Is that the place to look?
That is a good place to get an idea about what's coming in the relatively near term, because we regularly take commits from there. But steering the direction of the WebKit project for future stuff also will, of course, steer anything that uses WebKit as a rendering engine.
Okay, so if we want to see what's coming in the next versions of RAM and Nokia, we just need to look at the release notes for the last versions of iPhone and Android.
Well, as I said, iPhone and Android are both very forked.
Yeah.
So
that was kind of mean.
Yes.
Do we have any more questions from the audience? These are good. These are great questions, by the way. We do have one right here.
Okay, now I have a lot of questions, but first, Apple hasn't a roadmap neither, so.
Apple isn't here. No, is that what you're saying?
No, I was saying that Apple has a roadmap too, so you don't know what they're going to release.
Okay.
That's it. And then. Thing is, when are you going to really support HTML5 video and audio? Because externalizing it to the native apps isn't HTML5.
Yeah, I think the problem is that asking these guys for a date, when are you going to implement this feature, that feature, I could sit here and do that, but I don't think I'm going to get answers, right? If I start asking about specific features. So maybe that's not a productive line to go down, because
too bad.
It's going to be frustrating for us, it's going to be frustrating for them, and we just have to accept that we'll get them when we get them. But it's valuable feedback for them to know that we want this stuff.
I think it's at Opera. So I didn't answer to that part of your question, actually, Jeremy. We also look at, well, of course, what is happening in the industry, where there's developer momentum, and very much. So that's why my team and myself, we go to a lot of conferences. We try to talk to a lot of people and hear. Say, for instance, what people constantly complain to us about is for HTML5 forms that they want to have stylable forms, and, the calendar drop-down, why isn't it stylable? So we make then a proposal for a core team. It's not there yet, but we've made a proposal, and we influence their we influence their decision process. So I think
because you're hearing it from developers.
Because we hear it from developers, so we have sort of a bit of a direct line to our core team where we give them feedback. That doesn't always mean they say, okay, straight away drop everything, we implement this. But it's definitely we have a say there in sort of the prioritization. Okay. So that all your feedback definitely helps. So let us know if you're frustrated with stuff. Let us know, and then we look what we can do. So
there is also the conspiracy theory of why things take a while to get into the browser, which is that when you have this essentially competition within the same device between stuff you can do in the web browser and stuff you can do natively in an app, and the app store is where money is made, from selling apps, that maybe the company, maybe the boss man wants to keep the browser weak so that it doesn't threaten the business model. Is that pure tinfoil hat conspiracy theory stuff? Ooh, yeah. Silence. Silence speaks volumes. Come on. Surely not.
I want the browser to be as good as it can possibly be.
I think we do, yes, but
I think we're probably aligned on that, and we
when
are
you
not
say
doing...
we, do you mean your company?
I mean,
yeah?
we.
Okay.
And we're not doing anything to make, the web engine used to render apps worse than the web engine to render browser or anything like that.
Okay.
I agree with him, and in particular in Nokia, the browser is, relying on the libraries that the platform offers, so the browser can only be as good as the platform
I was expecting maybe stronger pushback, that's a ridiculous suggestion.
No, why would we limit any platform?
Okay, good. Wow, maybe a conspiracy theorist on something. Sorry, there was another question back here.
Thanks. As a disclaimer, I'm by no means fan of user agent sniffing and all for feature detection. But
you're going to say "but," aren't you? You're going to say "but." It's like I'm not a racist, but right. Sorry, that was totally inappropriate.
So one of the main problems I think not only I am facing is sending appropriate size images to a browser. So it's not that important which JavaScript APIs a browser supports. That I can figure out on the device itself. Sorry. But are there any plans to that the browser let the server know which, for example, screen size it has?
Screen size is supported in JavaScript since 1985.
I would love to support devices without relying on JavaScript enabled.
So we've always, or not always, but up until 5.0, the definitive BlackBerry approved way to detect what BlackBerry you are on was to check the XWAP profile header, which points to a URL that everybody ignores, but points to an XML file that describes the device. So we're still sending the XWAP profile header, and you can use it as a key to find that if you wanted to do server-side detection.
Interesting. I'm not sure if that's evil or not. Sounds like might be able to sleep at night if I did that. I don't know.
So for Opera, you could use media queries and serve other content, and the content is only downloaded if the media query is applied. So
that's
that
not
is
true in
a
all
way
browsers, is it?
That's not in all browsers, no. But
Opera
Opera does that. So that helps you actually. So you can serve different versions of the same image and only have the one downloaded that is actually needed on your page.
And I do share your frustration. I wish we didn't have to rely on things like JavaScript to have to figure out which images to serve, but it probably is the best solution for now. And Scott Jail is going to have some more.
I'm looking forward to it. Just one remark to media queries. The problem remains with, for example, images that are within the HTML code.
Rather than background images.
Background images are not the problem, but content images are the problem.
Yeah, I agree. I agree it's an issue, but it's also what makes it a very exciting time for web development, that we're trying to figure this stuff out, right? It's an exciting time. I sense people getting restless. I sense like maybe people are starting to vampire, but we've got a question over here. Do we have more questions to come, or are we starting to feel like it's getting toward... Like I said, this is very open-ended. You know, I could stay here all night. Let's hear what the next question is.
Actually, great that you mentioned this project in Portland, because we have the same issue with buying mobiles and all that. And we buy a lot of mobiles at UXU, and we have this pain. So I actually thought like we should start up something local to share them among. But that's just not the question.
Where are you based?
We're based in Munich or Germany, Amsterdam, so around the European area. And RIM is really good supporting by sending devices, so they're doing a good job there. But the question I actually have is we have a lot of screen sizes. We get a lot of devices with different resolutions and all that. So is the actual solution to that, and I would be a really big fan of it, and I had the pleasure to work with one of the runtimes that did it right, in my eyes, to use exact units. So a button should be 1 centimeter wide and 1 centimeter high, because my finger does never scale. But if I, as a developer, have to think of that all the time, like, okay, I get a small device or I get a big device, whatever, I want the button to be the button and be clickable. And by using, touch interfaces, that becomes more relevant. So because
your finger isn't made of pixels, then...
Exactly. Yes. Make centimeters or inches or millimeters make this work right. I know it's hard, but there's not. I don't see an effort on going in this direction. Is that something that should be done? I mean, will this be done?
I guess it goes back to the tougher question of figuring, how big is a pixel, right? DPI stuff. It's a hard problem.
I think there's a fundamental conflict on mobile between zooming and physical sizes, because people sometimes assume that the zoom level that you've loaded the page at when you type in the URL and finish loading is 1.0, and therefore if you say it should be 1 inch by 1 inch and you load the page, that it will be 1 inch by 1 inch. But that's almost never true, and we can't make it true because people don't design their content that way.
Hang on for the microphone just for a second.
On an interface, things like buttons, drop-downs, anything else that is functional, shouldn't those be, just made for the fingers, and the other stuff should be zoomable?
But then if you zoom in, you would get everything to be zoomed in and the button would stay the same size.
Right now, yes. But why don't we think about it in a different way?
So are you specifically asking about some sort of way of making an element on the page not zoom with the rest of the page?
Absolutely. The functional elements should...
I think that's a very interesting question, and we are working on stuff.
And in a way, it harks back to what you were saying about position fixed.
Right. It's the same sort of thing that I was talking about with position fixed, where having some elements of the page zoom according to the mobile browser and some not is a very interesting idea.
but it needs to be thought through to avoid
it's tough.
monster evolution like the viewport, where now the viewport supports scalability, DPI, width, height, and the different combinations generate sometimes effects that you wouldn't want.
Absolutely.
But if you would lay out your entire page with centimeters, it would work. But actually what I was trying to say, also bringing up another example that is not mine, besides my finger doesn't scale. The other example was actually Robin from W3C. He brought us up and he said, think of a use case that you have a mobile and you want to buy a ring. You just take your ring off the finger, put it on the screen, and size whatever you see on the screen to exactly that size. And then it has to fit because it has to be in a proper units. And I thought, yeah, that is really reasonable.
If the browser knows how big a pixel is, I guess.
You can still have accessibility concern, like we saw with the 3D finger, phone markup. You may still want buttons or clickable elements that are much bigger for accessibility.
I feel like we're bike shedding now. We're kind of starting to go down a rabbit hole. Did someone jump in if you got a separate question? Okay, we got a completely different question here. Or did someone else have the mic? No,
my question is about responsive web design. Currently, what we have, what we call responsive web design, is simply responding to the size of the device, the size of the screen on the device. As we've heard from Stephanie, we can't deduce anything about the context from that. All we know about the context from that is that we know nothing about the context.
But I mean, responsive web design doesn't cure cancer either, but that doesn't make it completely worse. Because it never claimed to cure cancer, it also never claimed to solve the context problem.
But we need to solve the context problem to take responsive web design on to the next level.
I think it's orthogonal. I think it's a separate question.
A separate question. But my question is to the browser manufacturers: is there anything you can do to help us solve the context problem? And if so, what?
You mean as in giving us information about the user's context?
Exactly, yes.
Okay. Is there anything you could give us? Because right now we're trying to infer context from the fact that it's a small screen, and we'll say, well, they're probably, narrow bandwidth. Bandwidth. Can you tell us? Do you have any way of knowing? Can you get that information to developers?
We do have a JavaScript object that tells you whether you're on Wi-Fi or on cellular.
Okay.
So device APIs would help there to provide more context. So, say battery life or accelerometer or Wi-Fi.
Brian also mentioned the system info, W3C work. That is around sensor lights, but also network speed, network connection. Am I online or not? This is all work that is happening right now in the standards and experimenting. There is nothing really out there, definitive. Available and solid that you can rely on, but it is coming. And then Nokia also had some experimental native application that had, I think, some interesting aspects where basically they were putting together a bunch of elements that the device knows about, like what time is it? Do I have appointments? Does the sensor light see that there is light, or is it completely dark? And based on that, it is adapting the type of ringtone that you have. So, if it is night and there's no light, it goes on mute because you're probably
pretty
sleeping.
Awesome to get that information to the front end, so we as developers could serve up a different style sheet depending on the amount of available light or something. That would be
it is something that is right now, I would say, in R&D stage, but it is coming. It is something definitely we are looking into.
That could be very exciting. Yeah, that could be really neat. Are we doing on questions anymore, or should I? Oh, yeah, Jen's hogging the microphone over here.
I'm sorry, Martha and I have been twittering, and it just hit both of us. It would be really cool. I know quite a few big interactive agencies do keep a library of devices in-house. Okay. So if you're at one of those agencies, please consider maybe once a week on a Friday afternoon having 2 or 3 open hours that people from the community of developers could come in and, with your permission, sitting in-house, do testing. And, if you guys have a beer Friday, just have them bring the beer.
Sounds good. And on the subject of beer, I gotta say,
I was just going to say, or charge for it. I'd be happy to pay a monthly fee to someone who would have that. I would pay a lot of money every month to be able to test on a lot of devices. So,
yeah, you could monetize that shit.
Make an app of it. You could make an app for it.
You could make an app for that.
You could make an app for it.
Yeah, have device, need device. Right. Is anybody else starting to get thirsty here? Starting to hunger for a beer? Yeah, I'm starting to feel it. Like we could be continuing this maybe over a beer in a couple of minutes. Okay, then let's wrap this up. I'm gonna finish up with one last question I got from comments on the blog post. I said, hey, if you got any questions for browser makers, and I've interspersed them throughout. Thanks for answering those questions. The last comment I got was from Andre Louise, who says, and it's kind of a good way to end, I think, says, how close are we to arrive at a blissful scenario where building mobile web apps comes with true cross-platform compliance as a given? Here I use cross-platform as iOS plus Android plus RIM plus Nokia plus Opera. Are we there? Is it near future? Is it an unattainable goal that could never be reached? Anybody?
I would say that as soon as anything is solid, we always tend to try to invent something new. And the W3C is actually the living proof of that, where you write the draft, you wait for someone to implement it, and then it becomes a recommendation. And so I would say, when would the developer do the work? Because do I start when the experimentation happens? Do I start after the recommendation has happened?
So what you're saying, you can have completely cross-platform as long as you use a certain subset of technologies.
And I think the big difference compared to a couple of years ago is that this subset of technologies is much more compelling than, your pages must be small and don't use any big images because otherwise everything will fall apart. Now you have a full set of very powerful APIs, a lot of HTML5, CSS3 support. So I would say this time is already there where you can build something that will reliably run across all these platforms.
So the baseline has
gotten much higher, yeah. And so you have a much bigger playing field, basically.
I think I agree that we're definitely there to some extent in terms of being able to build compelling experiences that work across different devices. I think that there's a lot of projects out there that are making this much easier. So all the big frameworks are working on this, and we all work closely, I'm sure, with jQuery and with Dojo and Sencha and PhoneGap.
That's true. The frameworks really help to kind of level out the playing field, so you do have a true cross-platform environment. Yeah, so we can live the dream. As long as we're not doing user agent sniffing, we can have proper cross-platform. Well, I want to thank you guys very much for agreeing to be here. You had to take quite a beating up here from me, but come on, it was fun, right? It was okay.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
Thank you, everyone, for your questions. Thank you very much.